Hi, and welcome to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 141. And the title of this episode is The Thunder Has Been Called Down, and Now It's Here. And what's happening around the world is all countries, all banks, all central banks are getting prepared for what is coming this fall. And we see this all over the world with the terrorist threats in the Middle East. We see the Middle East completely out of control at this point. We see that the warships are in the Gulf of Aden, in the Persian Gulf. We have a U.S. command center right outside of Syria, underneath the ground, which is bomb and missile proof. We have troops standing by to go into Syria. The U.S. government has paid troops and trained them to invade Syria and create a no-fly zone. We see drills and warnings all over the place, one from the FBI to the private sector about a possible cyber attack on financial institutions on 9/11. We have a Muslim march happening on 9/11, which is a potential false flag. We also have a power grid drill going on in November for a possible cyber attack. Plus, we have the Fed talking about tapering. They've done a test about tapering early on. They wanted to see how the market would perform. It took a dive, and they realize what is going to happen. We also have September 30th. The fiscal year comes to an end where they can supply Syria with weapons. We also see that the UN Arms Treaty Bill and the gun bill are pending in the Senate, and they need to get those approved so they can start confiscating and limiting the number of weapons that Americans have. And we saw a snippet of what they're going to try to do today, and I'll discuss that further. And there are a lot of things that are happening, and we all need to prepare for this. But we will discuss this throughout the report. And let's start with the economic collapse news to see what's happening around the world. Now, in Cyprus, and we know they have bail-ins, they had bailouts, people's accounts are still frozen. They're going on, 130 days now with capital controls, and we're seeing their economy just completely disintegrating, and we see now that new vehicle registrations fell by 36.6% in the first 6 months of this year. Now, compared to last year, at the same time period, there were 14,000 vehicles registered. This year, it's only 9,000, so that is dropping. Now, again, why aren't people registering new vehicles? Well, if your money is stuck in the bank and there are capital controls, they're very difficult to get your money out, and people are not running out to buy cars. Those people who do not have jobs right now because of the economy and unemployment so high, or they're underemployed, they're not running out to buy automobiles. And in Cyprus, we also see that industrial production is down by 17%. The industrial production index recorded at an annual drop rate of 16.8% in May of 2013 compared to May of 2012. So Cyprus is not doing well. It's the same with Greece, that just last year they received their first bailout. They told us, all the officials, they came out, they told us everything's going to be fine and it's taken care of. Greece is back on its feet and don't worry about it. Well, here we are, and the finance minister, Wolfi, I'll try to pronounce his name here, Shalbul, finally admitted, officially for the first time, that Greece will need a third bailout. They've already blown through 75% of their other bailout. They laid off all the people, and they have to lay off additional people. Unemployment is going up to 30%. Among the youths, they're getting close. I think they're around 60%. and it is just a mess over there. Things are not getting better. They will need bailout after bailout after bailout because they do not have the revenue to pay for all the interest on all this debt. And of course, the government officials, they're all telling you how great it is, and they go on to say that no, I don't expect a new haircut for Greece, which means they will get one. We are moving ahead step for step. There is no question that a lot has to change in Greece, but we also see a clear progress and recognize this. I mean, does anyone see a clear progress in this? They're on their third bailout. It's like having someone who's making $50,000 a year, who has $5,000 worth of debt each month, and they're on their 27th credit card to pay for all the interest on their other credit cards, and eventually the companies will not allow them to receive more credit cards, and that's when the end game happens. And they're on their third bailout now. Nothing has changed. Actually, it has gotten worse. Now, if we move back to the U.S. here, we're seeing a lot of retail stores showing that they're not doing well. We saw that Walmart, Saks, Nordstrom's, and Radio Shack, JCPenney, Best Buy, GameStop, sales have declined. And now we see Barnes & Noble. They were going to purchase a bookseller retail business, but Barnes & Noble's first quarter net loss more than doubled, so that part is completely off the table now. The only bright sign of retail doing well is Home Depot, which is up by 17% because of the housing recovery. Now, this data is from July and June. And back then, the bubble was going, and rates were down, and people were buying homes and buying gardening things. But recently, we've seen that gardening, home furnishing, mortgage applications have plunged, and we will see in the next couple of months, just like we saw with sales, this will all catch up, and we'll start to see Home Depot reporting sluggish sales, slower sales, because we have seen that mortgage companies have been laying off people. Now, if the housing boom is so fantastic and the housing market is so incredible, when have you ever heard of mortgage companies laying off people? Well, JP Morgan is doing it, Wells Fargo is doing it, and now we hear from 1-800 East West Mortgage. And this goes on to say that 1-800 East West Mortgage, which was largely suspended operations and laid off its workforce. And they went on to say, this is from the CEO, as rates rose, a number of people just went to the sidelines, which means it pushed them out of the market and they couldn't afford to purchase a house. The market, he added, went into a drought. And East West typically generated around $400 to $500 million a year in mortgages, and then sold them off to other mortgage companies. But we're seeing this trend all over the place, and there's always a lag, and now we're seeing it. I mean, mortgage applications plunged, rates are going up, sales were still going up, but now we're seeing them catch up, and sales are going to start to decline. And of course, just a month previous, we saw, or actually a couple of weeks ago, President Obama going around doing his campaign that housing market's going better, economy's doing better, unemployment's doing better, everything's just better. But when we really look deeply into it, it is not doing better. And this is the same thing that we saw prior to 2008. Everyone thought that housing could never go down. If you were just listening to the mainstream media and to the government officials telling you to purchase more and more homes and trade up, keep flipping, all those people, and I know a lot of them, who lost a lot of money doing this because they didn't see the real signs. They listened to the government and the mainstream media. Now, it's being reported that unemployment rates are rising in most U.S. states in July, and unemployment Unemployment rates rose in more than half of the U.S. states in July, and fewer states added jobs, echoing national data that show the job market may have lost some momentum here. And of course, if you're using the government's manipulated unemployment numbers, they're showing 7.4. But if you go back prior to 1994, the actual unemployment numbers are around 23%. But we will see unemployment start to get worse as time goes on. We've had a report from Meredith Whitney, who said in the financial area on Wall Street, they're looking to reduce firms are looking to reduce around 15%. That's around 100,000 jobs. I have a couple friends on Wall Street, and they are already talking about laying off in the next 6 months, which is the perfect time frame when everything is supposed to go to hell. Now, we also see that, and I reported this on a couple of reports ago about federal student aid demand soars, and they're seeing an increase on families who usually do not need financial aid are now applying for financial aid. Because you have to remember, in the good times, when everyone was going to school, people would have their homes, they would have their equity in their homes, they would take out lines of credit to pay for their children to go to school, and they wouldn't be eligible for student loans. These same families who have lost their homes to foreclosures, who are underemployed, or who have the same job but got rid of their homes and now are renting for some reason or another, are looking to get help with their children's financial aid. And they're seeing a rise in Pell Grants, which are grants by the federal government that you do not have to pay back, I believe. And we're seeing this happen more and more. And what they're saying here is a stunning 57% of undergraduates used federal student aid to help pay for college. And in 2012, it was around 47%. So we're seeing an increase there. And the report via the Education Department noted that even students from households we would consider middle income are increasingly eligible and are increasingly taking advantage of Pell Grants, as the number of full-time students who receive Pell Grants in families increasing, and that's what they're saying right now. And we can see why if we use common sense of why this is happening. People who don't have their homes and lost some income, lost savings, lost retirement, during this crash of 2008, they do not have the ability to pay for the school, and this is why we're seeing a lot of this increase. Now, talking about debt and GDP and inflation and unemployment, the total public debt now eclipses GDP in the U.S. The total public debt in the United States recently crossed the proverbial Rubicon and now equals 104.95% of GDP. And, some would argue that a healthy dose of debt is necessary to foster economic growth, but the U.S. unsustainable public debt exceeds the same debt measures of crisis-stricken Cyprus and the fragile Spain, where the public debt as a percentage of GDP had been most recently estimated at 85 and 84%. And we're also seeing that many investors and many countries are taking delivery of gold now from their ETFs. They're liquidating their ETFs, and what this goes on to say is most of the gold ETFs holdings were held in London vaults, and UK gold exports to Switzerland exploded from 92 tons in all of 2012 to a whopping 240 tons in May this year. The flow of gold to Switzerland is more a form of capital flight. As the safest form of money in the world, gold flows out of the UK and into strong store of wealth hands in Asia and storing bullion in Switzerland. Investors appear to be switching from ETFs to allocated accounts, which are often held in Switzerland. Goldcore have direct experience of this, and we have seen flows from clients liquidating ETFs in the UK, the US, and even Switzerland into the safety of allocated bullion accounts in Zurich and Hong Kong. Bail-ins and the risk of being an unsecured creditor of investment and saving providers is one of the reasons for the flight to allocated gold. And, we're seeing more and more of this, and it's the sign of the times. People are protecting themselves. People are getting ready for something that is coming. And the same with countries, especially China and Russia, who are purchasing gold and at an extreme rate at this time. And the only thing that I realize is there is no, and correct me if I'm wrong, someone can comment on this, the United States hasn't been purchasing gold. There are really no articles or anything out there or anything that would suggest, just like China, Russia, Brazil, all these other Germany, all these other countries purchasing gold, and the U.S. doesn't seem like it's doing much of anything. Now, there is a lot going on in the Middle East here. We have Egypt, and there are different reports coming out about that the U.S. government stopped aid to Egypt, and then there's another report saying, no, we have not stopped aid to Egypt. Well, the aid to the military is very important, and I went through this on the previous report, because Egypt controls the Suez Canal, and Egypt is the hub point for everything U.S. The U.S. controls everything in Egypt, and especially the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency and the private Western Central Bank. And what's happening is there is so much confusing. The government does not want to call this a coup, and if they do this under the law, they have to stop the aid to Egypt. And what I'm seeing here is that Congress would like to stop the aid because they're calling it a coup, and under the law it is, the military ousted Morsi and they've taken over everything. And right now they were reviewing everything, and the Obama administration is trying to figure out a way to allow the military to continually receive aid. Because what is interesting about this is that they already knew this was coming up, because we had that report about the Saudi foreign minister, Prince Saad al Faisal, saying that if the Western countries withdraw aid from Egypt, Saudi Arabia would take up the slack, and the U.S. could always funnel money to Saudi Arabia because they control Saudi Arabia, and then push the aid through to Egypt that way. And also, we're seeing that Mubarak is getting released at the same time that this is happening. So will they stop the aid in Egypt? I do not believe they will, just like our troops are never going to leave Afghanistan, even though they told us that they would be leaving. They're never going to leave because of the natural resources in Afghanistan and the strategic ally in Egypt and the control of Egypt. They will never just give up and stop the aid there and give up everything there. They'll always find a way to get around it, and we can see the way that they're looking to do this, and it's through Saudi Arabia. Now, Obamacare might be heading back to the Supreme Court because it's unconstitutional. And this is from Ben Swan's site, and I'm going to read part of this of what is going on with Obamacare. When crafting the legislation, Democrats and the President made a huge mistake under the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, better known as Obamacare. States were given the option to decide whether or not they wanted to set up an insurance exchange, which each state would run. Those states who choose not to set up their own insurance exchange would have a federal exchange set up in its place. States that do choose to set up an exchange are to fine employers who do not provide insurance under the employer mandate penalty, which is a tax to the people. This money is then returned to the employees to purchase insurance through the state-run exchange. So far, more than 24 states have opted out of the state exchange: Tennessee, Texas, Florida, and Oklahoma, to name a few. President Obama and Democratic leadership failed to add this same penalty to states who opt out of the state exchange in place of the federal exchange. Therefore, the dozens of states that have already opted out cannot be fined under the employer mandate penalty. This would have left Obamacare in shambles. So what did President Obama do? Well, just like he's done many other times, he decided, let's bypass some laws, and Obama went to the IRS and had them rewrite the health care law. However, this is unconstitutional. Only Congress can make such changes to laws. And now a lawsuit has been filed, and it's making its way to the Supreme Court, and it's filed by the state of Oklahoma, challenging this illegal power grab by the IRS. So we'll have to see how this plays out. And again, I will repeat this. Anything that the government does and tells you that it is great for everyone, and then puts a penalty or a tax on it if you decide or you can't afford it, is not good for the people. If something is truly good for the people, you wouldn't have to sell it, you wouldn't have to force it on people, and you wouldn't have to require a penalty or a tax on those who do not take it. Okay, now we had an interesting thing happen today. Shots were fired at an elementary school in Georgia. Normally the schools down south start a little bit earlier than the schools up north. They usually start this week, and the schools up north usually start around Labor Day. That's, roughly when they start. So we have to remember that the UN Arms Treaty and the gun bill are pending in the Senate. John Kerry said that they were going to have these signed and put into law by the end of August. A couple things have happened. We see, I've been looking, like CNN has the kids that killed that guy just because they wanted to with guns. And now we see shots fired in an elementary school. Nobody died. They caught the person who did it. And this is a lead up to get everyone's emotions flying high again and begging the government to get these laws passed. Now, will the laws be passed under this first attempt? Maybe, maybe not. If it didn't work, they will move on to stage 2. And what that is, a more horrific false flag. And this will come very soon. I have had this on my timeline now since I started. If you go to x22report.com, up top it's called the economic collapse, and that is the timeline. It's dynamic. I change it when something new comes up. I add to it, but I've always had war, cyber attack, and another shooting to pass gun legislation as false flags that will be coming in the future. I don't have a date for them, but I know something will happen. And here we are. We're starting down the same path that happened right before Sandy Hook, and they will push this agenda forward. And they really want, and we also have to remember this. Well, people say to me, well, why do you think this is going to happen? Nobody creates executive orders if the laws aren't going to be passed. President Obama has already created the executive orders that support the UN Arms Treaty and the gun bill that they are pushing through the Senate. And we have to remember that during the Boston bombing, the gun bill was in the Senate and being voted on at the same exact time. It was shot down at that time. President Obama said, don't remove it from the Senate, keep it there, and keep it pending. What's pending in the Senate? The UN Arms Treaty, the gun bill from Dianne Feinstein, and CISPA. They're all pending there, waiting for an event to happen, and they will happen. Now, what does the UN Arms Treaty do? Well, this was recently in the Washington Times, and they reported on what the UN Arms Treaty is. And I reported this on a couple of reports ago, but I'm just going to repeat it now. Restricting civilian possession of firearms only to those at the lowest risk of misusing them. Limiting sales and other transfers of firearms only to commercial transactions at licensed sales premises. In other words, no transfers at gun shows. Only persons licensed and periodically relicensed by the national government could possess firearms. All firearms must be registered with the national government. Now, let me just stop there for a second. President Obama, if you remember, the executive orders, he already has the executive orders supporting this of registering your firearms. All persons wishing to possess a firearm must pass a rigorous exam administered by the national government. All firearms must be stored in locked containers, separate from ammunition and bolted to a heavy, immovable object. Only a predetermined number of firearms and rounds of ammunition may be possessed by a properly licensed civilian, which is a limit on ammunition. Magazine capacity is limited to 10 rounds. Okay, we have Dianne Feinstein. They have that in their gun bill, UN Arms Treaty, and guess what? The executive orders that support all this. Possession of a firearm may only occur after a 7-day waiting period. No civilian could own or possess a firearm for self-defense unless he first demonstrates a clear and convincing need. Individuals licensed to own firearms are subject to a periodic and random inspections of their homes or businesses, which allows them to come in and take a look at your home whenever they want. In order to be granted a license to possess a firearm, an individual must secure recommendations from responsible members of society attesting to their suitability to possess a small arm. They are making it so difficult to get a firearm that most people will not be able to get it. Under the Second Amendment, this is infringing. It says, shall not infringe upon bearing arms. This is a complete violation of the Second Amendment, and this is what they need to do before the economic collapse. They do not want an America which is armed. Now, we know that New York has the stop and frisk law, and a judge has found that it's unconstitutional. But guess what? Detroit would like to adopt the stop and frisk law, and we are going to see this spread through all those cities that are on the verge of bankruptcy or have been bankrupt already, because these are the very large population areas. They are collapsing, and they will violate every single right of every single person to control everyone during the economic collapse. Okay, let's move on here. Now, states are ignoring feds, and they're ramping up their EMP fight. And this goes on to say legislators from a number of states are preparing to introduce bills to protect utilities from either a natural or man-made electromagnetic pulse event, which is an EMP, despite opposition from major utilities and the failure of the federal government to act. So right now, the federal government is really not doing much to prevent the national electrical grid and the critical infrastructures. They're not looking to protect them from an EMP. They're not looking to protect them from a cyber attack. And this goes on to say, along with the national electrical grid and other critical infrastructures include telecommunications, banking, and financial transaction, oil, natural gas, water, food, emergency service, and space systems. And what they're saying is, in short, if we get hit with any type of cyber attack or EMP, the event could cause the collapse of a society. And one of the spokesman, Pry, said, "We are running out of time to protect the grid. The solar maximum is upon us. Millions of cyber attacks are already happening daily." And what the government says, the Defense Department, has testified to Congress that it has a 99% reliance on the U.S. electrical grid system for maintaining its bases and being prepared to meet any national security emergency. And again, don't worry, we are from the government. We're here to help, which really they're not. And that was by Ronald Reagan, by the way. The 9 scariest words. Now, we are seeing more cyber attacks. We've seen it on CNN. We've seen it on the Washington Post. For some reason, Amazon and Google, they both went down. And New York Times went down, and they came up with some type of lame excuse of an update that they used. But we're seeing is ad-Din al-Qassam cyber fighters and the Syrian Electronic Army have been hitting other banks, and we're looking at J.P. Morgan Chase and Citigroup, and they've been hitting by they are being hit by cyber attacks, and this is going on and on throughout. Going back a year and a half now, they've been building their case that cyber attacks are very dangerous. They can hit financial institutions, they can steal identities, they can siphon off money, they can hit the power grid, water systems, and we are seeing this happen more and more right now. And this is being set up for a false flag event which is coming this fall. Because what do we know? We know that they're talking about EMP. We know they're talking about cyber attacks. We also have the Million Muslim March on September 11th of this year, which is a potential false flag. I don't know why they picked that date. And they're going out there to protest Washington about the rights of Muslims. Why are they being blamed for everything? Not all Muslims are bad, and I have nothing against Muslims or any other religion, but this might just be a bad date to do this. But we can see that government infiltrators could be in this march to cause something to happen. During the same time, the FBI came out with its private sector advisory saying that financial institutions are under threat of a cyber attack on September 11th, 2013. We also see UK warning that the cyber threat on banks is one of the biggest things that could bring down the whole economic model. And we're also seeing this November a power grid drill happen at the same time. And we also know that the Fed was talking about taper. We know we're getting prepared for war in Syria and other countries. All of this is all happening at the same time. And we also see the stock market, the plunge protection team, and the high-frequency traders. They are trying to keep this market going. And today it fell in the red again for many, 5 days in a row now or something like that. And it's getting more and more difficult, and things are accelerating, and you can hear the thunder in the background coming toward us, and if you are not ready, it's going to smash through, and you will not be prepared to what is coming. Now, there was also another report about FEMA Region 3. And this goes on to say, now I looked throughout and I can't find anything that um, backs this up, except for this, according to a notice sent by Senator Sheldon R. Songstad of South Dakota State. It says that immediate emergency FEMA Region 3 alert and 11 million in antibiotics to be delivered to FEMA Region 3 by October 1st. And Region 3 includes D.C., Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Washington, West Virginia. And it says, 11 million in antibiotics to be delivered to FEMA Region 3 by October 1st by the CDC. FEMA purchases orders for over 14.2 million for MREs and HEAR meals to be delivered to Region 3 by October 1st. FEMA purchase orders for 22 million pouches of emergency water to be delivered to Region 3 by October 1st. FEMA purchase orders for 13.6 million for MREs and HEAR meals to be delivered to Austin by October 1st, and 2,800 MRAPs must be delivered to DHS by October 1st. And this was put out there by Susan Duclos. And, this is just part of what is happening out there. Now, Israel has also issued a terrorist warning that Al-Qaeda will be after everyone during the high holy days of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And this just plays into what is happening with this Al-Qaeda threat all over the world. And they are just trying to build this up so far, so when the event happens during this fall, early winter period, they will have every right to bring the war forward, to declare martial law, for the banks to declare bail-ins, for whatever else they didn't get done, they might be able to get done during this period. This will hide the collapse, which they know is coming, and the government and the Fed will look like they're trying to fix it. It will take the blame off the Fed and government, put it onto another country. The Fed and government will try to help by printing even more money, because at this point, other countries will start dumping treasury bonds, because the yields of treasuries will start to rise, things will get out of hand, and the whole thing will start to collapse. And I discussed this in episode 138. If you'd like to review that and then go forward up into this one, it explains what I believe is going to happen. And again, I remind everyone, for those who have not prepared, we do have a small window to do this. And again, what is the worst case scenario? You buy water, you buy food, you have extra medication for those people who have ailments, you have toiletry batteries, a weapon, you have lights, you have fuel. The worst thing that happens, nothing happens. But guess what? You have all this stuff, so you use it. But if something does happen, you are prepared. I rather be on the side of being completely prepared and ready, so when I wake up and you hear on the news there's been a cyber attack or another event that happened, it could be something else, the banks are frozen. Oh, that's right, also keep cash on hand. And if you can, I would take quite a bit of money out of the bank, because once the bail-ins start, you will not be able to access your money, just like in Cyprus. And it's better to wake up or see what's happening in the afternoon of Friday, that you have everything in order and you are okay. Those families around you who have no clue what's going on are going to be shaken. They're going to be scared. They're not going to know what's happening. They're going to be very angry for another country doing this to us. They are not going to be able to listen to reason, because they have no idea what you're talking about. For those people who are listening to this and understand what's happening, all they're going to see is that Syria, Iran, or China, looks like Syria at this point, They're the ones who did this to us, and we need to invade. That's all they're going to know. Listen, everyone, be safe, be well, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.